I never thought my own parents would steal from me, but that's exactly what happened when they emptied my college fund to pay for my brother's study abroad programs and car repairs. The $32,000 they had promised would help me attend university. Gone. With only $200 remaining. That night, as I stared at my MIT acceptance letter, I realized a devastating truth. In my family, I had always been the backup plan, the afterthought, the investment they were willing to sacrifice. But what they never expected was that their betrayal would become the foundation of my success, and the reason I would eventually cut them from my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Taylor. I grew up in a modest brick home on Maple Street in Springfield, Illinois, the kind of middle-class neighborhood where kids rode bikes until streetlights came on and everyone knew which houses gave out full-size candy bars on Halloween. Our house sat between the Johnsons with their perfectly manicured lawn and the Murphys with their eternally unfinished kitchen renovation. Nothing about our exterior suggested what went on inside. My father, Robert, worked as a sales manager at Riverside Motors, the largest car dealership in town. He had a booming laugh that could be heard from 3 rooms away, and a collection of promotional polo shirts with the dealership logo that he wore with unironic pride. My mother, Diane, worked as an administrative assistant at Springfield Elementary, which meant she knew everyone's business and frequently reminded us that nothing we did at school would go unnoticed. Then there was my brother, Jason. 3 years older, with the kind of effortless charisma that made him the automatic center of any room. He had our father's broad shoulders and our mother's expressive eyes, while I inherited my father's analytical mind and my mother's slight build. Jason played football, dated cheerleaders, and maintained just enough of a grade point average to stay eligible for sports. Adults were charmed by him, teachers made exceptions for him, and my parents orbited around him like he was their son. Our living room told the story better than I could. The mantel displayed trophies, all Jason's. The walls featured framed photos, mostly Jason's achievements. Jason scoring the winning touchdown at homecoming. Jason in his graduation cap. Jason with his arm around Dad on fishing trips I was never invited to join, because it's really a guy's thing, Emma. In the few family photos where I appeared, I was usually standing slightly to the side, as if I were an afterthought to the composition. In one particularly telling Christmas photo, half my face was cut off at the edge of the frame. Mom had it printed and framed anyway. I don't want to say I was unloved. That would be melodramatic and untrue. But I was certainly loved differently, less visibly, with fewer celebrations and more qualifications. My achievements were acknowledged with polite nods rather than exuberant pride. My needs were addressed when convenient rather than prioritized. And as I would eventually discover, my future was considered optional while Jason's was deemed essential. The differences in how we were treated weren't dramatic at first. Just small things that built up over time like sediment in a river, eventually changing its course entirely. When Jason needed new cleats for football, they appeared within days, the price tag never mentioned. When I needed new glasses after mine broke during gym class, Mom sighed about the expense and made me wait 3 weeks, squinting through cracked lenses until the insurance claim processed. For Jason's 16th birthday, Dad surprised him with professional driving lessons and promised to match whatever he saved toward his first car. On my 16th birthday, I received a leather-bound journal and a card that read, "Happy birthday, Emma," with no personal message inside. When I mentioned the driving lessons Jason had received, Mom explained they were saving for important expenses and that I could always use the bus to get around town. I didn't point out that the bus didn't run after 7 p.m. or on Sundays, making it useless for my weekend job at the library. I still remember watching through the living room window as Dad taught Jason to change the oil in his newly purchased used Camry. A father-son bonding moment straight from a television commercial. When I asked if I could learn too, Dad laughed. "Why would you need to know that? You'll always have someone to help you with that stuff." The assumption being, I suppose, that I would marry someone mechanically inclined, or that Jason would always be around to help his little sister. What they didn't understand was that their dismissal was shaping me in ways they never intended. Each overlooked achievement, each financial disparity, each casual disregard hardened something inside me. Not into bitterness, but into self-reliance. I learned early that if I wanted something, I would need to figure out how to get it myself. I discovered that the path to any recognition in our house ran through academic achievement. While Jason struggled to maintain C's and the occasional B, I realized I had a natural aptitude for mathematics and science. Numbers made sense to me in a way people often didn't. They were consistent, logical, and rewarded precision. In 7th grade, my science project on water purification using locally sourced materials won first place at the regional fair. I had spent weeks testing different natural filtration methods, meticulously documenting results, and creating a presentation, board with perfect right angles and carefully lettered headings. Mom and Dad attended the award ceremony, but left immediately after my name was called, explaining they needed to take Jason to his baseball practice. "He can't be late. The coach really counts on him," Mom said as they hurried toward the exit, my blue ribbon still in my hand. That night, I placed the ribbon in my desk drawer, rather than on the refrigerator where it would be overshadowed by Jason's participation certificates and team photos. It was the first time I consciously chose to keep an achievement private, protected from comparison or dismissal. I started staying late after school to use the computer lab, teaching myself programming languages from books I checked out from the public library. The quiet space became my refuge, somewhere I could excel without comparison, where my achievements weren't measured against Jason's popularity or athletic prowess. Mrs. Lowell, the computer lab supervisor, noticed me there consistently and began leaving more advanced books on my usual workstation. "You have a good mind for systems," she told me after watching me troubleshoot a network issue that had been plaguing the lab for weeks. "You see patterns where others just see problems." By sophomore year of high school, I had developed a system for managing my time: school during the day, part-time job at Garner's Grocery in the evenings, shelving, cashiering, whatever hours they would give me, and late nights hunched over my computer, building increasingly complex programs. I created a database system for the school library that tracked overdue books more efficiently than their outdated card system. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, was so impressed, she wrote a formal letter to the principal commending my initiative. Mr. Peterson, the computer science teacher, noticed my work and gave me access to the advanced programming textbooks usually reserved for seniors. "You have a real gift, Emma," he told me after I debugged the school's website in an afternoon when the paid consultant had estimated it would take a week. "Have you thought about studying computer science in college?" I nodded enthusiastically. Despite the disparities in our household, my parents had started college funds for both Jason and me when we were born. Nothing extravagant, but enough to help with state university tuition if supplemented with scholarships and part-time work. I'd already researched the top computer science programs in Illinois and neighboring states, calculating exactly what grades and extracurriculars I'd need to earn scholarships to supplement the fund. I kept a spreadsheet tracking my progress: GPA, extracurricular activities, potential recommendation letters, projected costs for different universities. While other teenagers decorated their bedroom walls with band posters, mine featured a whiteboard with color-coded goals and timelines. I wasn't just planning for college. I was mapping an escape route to a future where I would be valued for exactly who I was. Junior year, I was selected for a competitive summer coding camp at the University of Illinois. Only 20 students statewide were accepted, and the 6-week program would include instruction from industry professionals and university professors. The acceptance letter came with a partial scholarship, but still required a $1,200 fee for room and board during the program. When I showed my parents the letter at dinner, explaining how this opportunity could lead to college scholarships and future internships. They exchanged uncomfortable glances across the meatloaf. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "We're really proud of you, Emma," Mom said, her voice hesitant, stirring her peas into mashed potatoes, a nervous habit I recognized from previous financial discussions. "But right now might not be the best time for extra expenses." Dad nodded in agreement. "Things are tight at the dealership with the economy the way it is. Maybe next summer there will be other opportunities." That weekend, they drove 4 hours to watch Jason play in an away game at Midwest State College, where he was barely maintaining the GPA required for athletic eligibility. I stayed home, applying for additional part-time jobs that might help me earn the camp fee myself. I didn't mention that I had seen the credit card statement showing they had purchased a $300 GPS system for Jason's car the previous month, or the new gaming console that had appeared in his room over spring break. Miss Garcia, my math teacher, found me during lunch period on Monday, eating a sandwich alone in her classroom while working on calculus problems. "Emma, I heard about your acceptance to the UIU camp. That's a prestigious opportunity." When I explained my financial situation, she paused thoughtfully. "Let me make some calls. There's a local tech company that might be interested in sponsoring a promising student." 2 weeks later, I had a spring internship at Tri-State Software and a full sponsorship for the summer camp. The company's founder, Sarah Jenkins, personally met with me, a 30-something woman with a direct gaze and no wasted words. "We need more young women in tech," she said. "Your teachers speak very highly of your potential, and frankly, your database project for the library shows more innovative thinking than some college graduates I've interviewed." For the first time, someone was investing in my future based on my abilities, not out of obligation or shared DNA. The validation felt different, cleaner somehow, untainted by the complex dynamics of family expectations or comparisons. The summer camp exceeded even my highest expectations. For 6 weeks, I was surrounded by peers who shared my interests and teachers who challenged me to push beyond textbook solutions. I learned about algorithm efficiency, data structures, and the emerging field of artificial intelligence. More importantly, I found my people, other students who understood the satisfaction of elegant code and the thrill of solving complex logical problems. I returned home with new skills, professional connections, and a clearer vision of my future than ever before. Senior year arrived with college applications and critical decisions ahead. My GPA was nearly perfect at 3.97, and my SAT scores placed me in the top percentile nationally. Ms. Garcia and Mr. Peterson both wrote glowing recommendation letters, and Sarah Jenkins offered a reference from Tri-State Software, where I'd continued working part-time during the school year. I applied to 7 schools with strong computer science programs, including 2 Reach schools with competitive scholarships. When acceptance letters began arriving in spring, the results exceeded my careful projections. I was accepted to all 7, including MIT with a partial merit scholarship that would cover approximately 60% of the tuition. When the MIT letter arrived, I ran into the kitchen where Mom was preparing dinner, chopping carrots with mechanical precision. "Mom, I got into MIT with a scholarship." I held out the letter, hands trembling with excitement. She glanced at it briefly, then returned to her chopping. "That's in Massachusetts, right? That's so far away, Emma. And isn't it extremely expensive, even with a scholarship?" "That's why I have my college fund," I explained, my initial excitement dampening slightly at her lukewarm response. "With the scholarship and the money you and Dad have been saving, I should be able to make it work. I've already calculated it all." Mom's face changed, a flash of panic quickly masked by a tight smile. "We should talk about this with your father when he gets home." The 3 hours until Dad's return were among the longest of my life. I sat in my room, refreshing MIT's virtual campus tour, and imagining myself walking those hallways, finally among peers who would challenge and understand me. When I heard the garage door open, I took a deep breath and headed downstairs. But Dad wasn't alone. Jason had driven home from college for the weekend, his laundry bag undoubtedly full of dirty clothes for Mom to wash. As I waited to share my news, they spent dinner discussing Jason's plans to study abroad in Italy the following semester, an expensive program focused on Mediterranean culture and business practices, which seemed to be a thinly veiled excuse for a semester of lighter coursework and European travel. "It's a great networking opportunity," Jason explained, helping himself to a second serving of Mom's roast, "and the credits will still count toward my business degree." The fact that he had switched majors 3 times in 2 years, extending his graduation timeline indefinitely, went unmentioned. Finally, I spoke up. "I got accepted to MIT today, with a scholarship." "MIT?" Jason laughed, mouth full. "Isn't that where all the nerds go?" Dad gave him a disapproving look before turning to me. "That's impressive, Emma, really. But honestly, State University has a perfectly good computer program, and you could live at home to save money." "But I have my college fund," I insisted. "Plus the scholarship and what I've saved from working. I've done all the calculations. It's feasible if I'm careful and work part-time during school." The uncomfortable silence that followed told me everything before they even spoke. Mom looked at Dad. Dad studied his plate. Jason continued eating, oblivious to the tension. "About that fund," Dad began slowly, putting down his fork. "We've had to reallocate some of those resources." Over the next 30 minutes, they explained how Jason's college expenses had been more than anticipated. His switch of majors had extended his timeline. His car had needed significant repairs. The meal plan they'd purchased hadn't covered his actual food consumption. Housing had increased unexpectedly. And now, his study abroad program was an essential networking opportunity that would cost nearly $14,000 for a single semester. "We always meant to replace it," Mom added quickly, her fingers twisting her napkin into a tight spiral. "But with the economy and your father's commission structure changing," the pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. All those times they couldn't afford things for me, while Jason received whatever he needed. All those careful calculations I'd made, based on a promise that had already been broken. "How much is left?" I asked, my voice unnaturally calm. More uncomfortable glances. "About $1,200, Dad finally admitted. The irony wasn't lost on me. The exact amount of the coding camp they couldn't afford. Now all that remained of my future. 4 years of college reduced to less than 1 month's expenses because they had systematically emptied my fund to support Jason's meandering academic journey and lifestyle choices. Jason at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Hey, I didn't know it was coming from your fund, Em. But look, you're smart. You'll get more scholarships." I stood up from the table, legs feeling oddly disconnected from my body. "I'm going for a walk." Outside in the cool spring air, I made calculations. In my head, even with my partial scholarship and personal savings, MIT was now financially out of reach without crushing loans that would follow me for decades. All because my parents had decided Jason's extended college experience and semester eating pasta in Italy were more important than the future I had worked so systematically to build. I walked for hours until streetlights came on and the temperature dropped. By the time I returned home, my anger had crystallized into something harder, clearer, and more focused. I wouldn't waste energy trying to change minds that had already shown their priorities so clearly. Instead, I would redirect that energy into finding a new path forward. The next morning, I received an email from Sarah Jenkins at Tri-State Software. "Emma, our parent company is launching a new Emerging Talent Scholarship program for promising students pursuing computer science degrees. The award includes full tuition at selected universities, a guaranteed summer internship position, and a job offer upon graduation. Given your exceptional work with us over the past year, I'd like to nominate you as our first candidate. This would be a competitive process with candidates from across the country, but I believe you have exactly what we're looking for. The application required a portfolio of work, letters of recommendation, and a presentation to the company's executive board about how I envisioned technology shaping the future. I had 2 weeks to prepare. I threw myself into the application with an intensity born of necessity. During days, I attended classes and maintained my GPA. During evenings, I worked my regular shifts at the grocery store. And during nights, I compiled my projects, enhanced my library database system with new features, and prepared a 20-minute presentation on future applications of machine learning in business environments. I told no one at home about this opportunity. When Mom asked why I was staying out late, I simply said I was working extra shifts at my part-time job. Dad rarely noticed my comings and goings anyway, and Jason had returned to school, taking with him thousands of dollars that should have been securing my future. The day of my presentation, I stood before 12 executives in business attire, my hands steady as I connected my laptop to their projection system. For 20 minutes, I walked them through my vision for data-driven business solutions, demonstrating the projects I'd built and explaining my approach to problem-solving. I spoke with a confidence that surprised even me, perhaps because for once, I wasn't seeking approval from people who had already decided my worth before I opened my mouth. When I finished, Sarah Jenkins was smiling. The CEO asked thoughtful questions about my long-term goals. The CTO inquired about my thoughts on emerging technologies. Not once did anyone suggest that my ambitions were too large or my plans too expensive. Instead, they engaged with my ideas as if they had genuine value. 3 days later, Sarah called me personally. "Emma, I'm thrilled to tell you that you've been selected for the full scholarship. The board was extremely impressed with your technical skills and your clear vision for how you want to contribute to the field." That evening, I sat my parents down at the kitchen table where, weeks earlier, they had revealed the emptiness of my college fund. "I need to tell you something important." I explained about the scholarship, the internship, and the future job opportunity. Then I took a deep breath and continued. "I've decided to accept, and I've also decided to move out next week. I've found a small apartment near Tri-State where I'll live until I leave for school in August." "Move out?" Mom looked shocked. "But you don't need to do that. You could save money by staying here." "This isn't about money," I replied. "This is about me needing to be somewhere where my future matters, where I'm not an afterthought." "That's not fair, Emma," Dad started. "We've always what? Supported me equally?" "We both know that's not true." I kept my voice level, despite the emotion welling up. "You took the money that was meant for my education and gave it to Jason for study abroad programs and car repairs. You made a choice about whose future mattered more." Jason walked in halfway through the conversation, having stopped by to pick up mail. "What's going on?" "Emma's being dramatic about moving out," Mom explained dismissively. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm making a decision about my life based on the reality that I can't count on support from this family." I turned to Jason. "This isn't personal against you, but I need to look out for myself because no one else here has been." Dad's face flushed red. "We've given you everything you needed." "No," I corrected him. "You've given me everything you thought I needed, after making sure Jason had everything he wanted. There's a difference." The small apartment I found was nothing special. A one-bedroom unit in a converted Victorian house that had seen better days. The bathroom sink dripped, the floors creaked, and the ancient radiator clanked all night during cold spring days. But it was mine. Every square inch belonged to me alone. No football trophies dominated the living space, no one criticized my organizational systems, and no one made me feel like an inconvenience for existing. Within 3 days, I'd packed everything that mattered into 6 cardboard boxes: clothes, books, my computer equipment, and a few personal items. It was surprising how little I actually needed to take from my childhood home. Mom hovered anxiously as I loaded my Honda Civic, a 10-year-old model I'd purchased with my own savings last year. She kept offering things: dishes, towels, the quilt from the guest room. I accepted only what I genuinely needed, refusing to be indebted further. "You don't have to do this," she said for the dozenth time as I closed the trunk. "We can figure something out about MIT." "It's already figured out," I replied, not unkindly but firmly. "The Tri-State Scholarship is a better opportunity anyway. Full tuition plus guaranteed employment." "But you've always wanted to go to a prestigious school," she insisted, wringing her hands. I paused, keys in hand. What I've always wanted was to be taken seriously. This company is taking me seriously. They're investing in me based on what I can do, not who I'm related to. Dad stood in the doorway, arms crossed. He hadn't helped with the loading, but he hadn't hindered it either. "You're making this into something bigger than it needs to be," he called. "Families help each other. Sometimes one person needs more than another." "You're right," I agreed, surprising him. "And I needed my college fund. The one you promised would be there." He had no response to that. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of them in my rearview mirror. 2 middle-aged people looking somehow smaller than they had before, standing in front of a house that no longer contained all of their children. The Tri-State Software office became my second home during those transitional months. Sarah Jenkins had helped arrange my housing, and in return, I worked part-time in their junior developer program. My assignment was to help create internal tools for tracking project milestones. Nothing groundbreaking, but practical experience that taught me more about real-world software development than any classroom could. My small apartment slowly took shape. I found a second-hand desk for my computer setup, a comfortable reading chair from a thrift store, and basic kitchenware from a discount outlet. Each purchase was carefully calculated, each item selected for function rather than appearance. My space was minimal but efficient, much like the code I wrote, and I wrote a lot of code. When I wasn't working or preparing for MIT, I developed my own projects: a budgeting app that tracked expenses with ruthless precision, a study schedule optimizer that maximized retention based on cognitive science principles, and a local food delivery aggregator that combined menus from restaurants near campus. Practical solutions to everyday problems that reflected my new reality. Self-reliance wasn't just a personality trait, but a survival skill. Mom called every Sunday afternoon like clockwork. The conversations were stilted at first, filled with weather updates and news about relatives I barely knew. She never mentioned Jason's study abroad program directly, though sometimes Italian landmarks would feature in her casual mentions of family photos she'd seen online. Dad rarely came to the phone, claiming he was busy with yard work or watching a game. I didn't volunteer much information either. I answered direct questions about my health and work, but offered little about my emotional state or daily life. Part of me wanted them to ask, to show genuine curiosity about who I was becoming away from their shadow. But the questions remained superficial, and so did my answers. Jason texted occasionally, usually when he needed something, the name of Mom's favorite perfume for her birthday, or advice on which laptop to buy for his senior year. His messages always had a casual, breezy tone, as if the fundamental inequity in our upbringing was some minor misunderstanding rather than a pattern that had shaped both our lives. In June, a small package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a framed photo of me at the regional science fair in 7th grade, holding my blue ribbon. I hadn't even known this photo existed. The note with it read simply, "Found this while cleaning. Thought you might want it. Mom." I placed it on my desk beside my computer, not because I wanted a daily reminder of my past, but because it represented something important. The moment I'd first realized I could excel on my own terms. That blue ribbon had been earned. Without family connections, without preferential treatment, without anyone clearing the path for me. Just like everything else I'd achieved since. As July arrived, I began preparing for MIT in earnest. The scholarship from Tri-State covered tuition and included a stipend for housing and basic expenses, but I would still need to work part-time during the school year. I researched campus jobs, applied for additional small grants, and created a detailed budget for my first semester down to the cost of laundry and occasional coffee. At work, Sarah called me into her office one afternoon. "Emma, the executive team has been impressed with your contributions this summer," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "We'd like to offer you an enhanced scholarship package." Inside was an amended agreement that included a housing allowance, a technology stipend for required equipment, and a part-time remote position I could maintain while studying. The increase would eliminate the need for an additional campus job, allowing me to focus more fully on my studies. "Why?" I asked, genuinely puzzled by this unexpected generosity. Sarah leaned back in her chair. "Because investment in the right talent pays dividends, and frankly, because I see myself in you, determined, resourceful, and unwilling to let circumstances dictate your potential." I signed the amended agreement immediately, a lump forming in my throat that I refused to acknowledge as emotion. This wasn't charity, it was recognition. The distinction mattered enormously. 2 weeks before my departure for Cambridge, the local newspaper published a feature on regional students receiving prestigious scholarships. The journalist had interviewed me briefly about the Tri-State Award, and I'd explained the program's focus on developing technology talent in the Midwest. The article included a professional headshot taken at the Tri-State office and a detailed description of my work developing database systems and applications. The morning it was published, Mom arrived at my apartment unannounced, newspaper in hand. "Why didn't you tell us about this interview?" she asked, holding up the paper with my photo prominently displayed. I stepped back to let her in, surprised by her presence. My apartment was immaculate as always, but I felt oddly vulnerable having her in my space. It wasn't a big deal, just a local interest piece. She moved tentatively into the living area, eyes scanning my minimalist furnishings. "The article makes it sound like a very big deal. Full scholarship, guaranteed job, selected from applicants, nationwide." She sat carefully on the edge of my reading chair. "We had no idea." I shrugged, unsure how to respond. The information wasn't secret, but I hadn't volunteered it either. Part of me had wanted them to find out this way, to see my accomplishments validated in black and white by someone other than myself. "You've done all of this on your own," she said softly, and for the first time, I heard something in her voice that sounded like genuine realization. "We didn't even know how capable you were." "I tried to show you," I replied, the words emerging before I could filter them. "For years I tried to show you." She looked down at her hands. "I always thought Jason needed us more. He struggled with school, with decisions. You always seemed to have everything figured out. I figured things out because I had to," I explained, not harshly but matter-of-factly. "Because no one was figuring them out for me." A silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken frustrations and missed connections. Finally, Mom stood and reached into her purse. "Your father and I have been talking," she said, pulling out an envelope. "We want to contribute something to your education, even though you don't need it anymore." She held out the envelope. "It's not much, just $2,000. We've been putting aside a little each month since you moved out." I stared at the envelope without taking it. "And Jason's study abroad program? Is that still happening?" She hesitated. "He's already in Italy. The program started last week. The pieces clicked into place. They hadn't developed a sudden understanding of equity. They had simply found additional resources once Jason's immediate expenses were covered. The gesture was meant to ease their conscience, not address the fundamental imbalance that had defined our family. "Keep it," I said gently. "Put it toward Jason's next semester or save it for an emergency. I don't need it anymore." Her face fell. "We're trying to make things right, Emma." "I know," I acknowledged. "But this isn't about money. It's about recognizing worth. And I've already found people who recognize mine." After she left, I sat in my reading chair for a long time, thinking about the concept of value, how we assign it to others, how we recognize it in ourselves. My parents had consistently valued Jason's desires over my needs, not out of malice, but out of a fundamental misreading of who we both were. They saw his struggles as requiring intervention, and my independence as requiring nothing. They never understood that independence can be a response to neglect rather than an innate trait. The scholarship award ceremony was held the following week at Tri-State's headquarters. The company had expanded the program to include 3 recipients, though I remained the primary awardee and speaker. The event was formal, with the CEO, board members, and local business leaders in attendance. Sarah had helped me select an appropriate outfit, a tailored navy suit that projected competence and professionalism rather than trying to make me look older than my 18 years. To my surprise, my entire family attended. Mom and Dad arrived early, dressed in their Sunday best, looking simultaneously proud and uncomfortable in the corporate environment. Jason appeared just before the ceremony began, his summer tan contrasting with a slightly too tight dress shirt that suggested his measurements had changed during his Italian sojourn. The CEO's introduction was brief but meaningful. The future of technology depends not just on innovations, but on innovators, individuals who approach problems with fresh perspectives and unwavering determination. Our inaugural scholarship recipients exemplify these qualities, particularly our primary awardee, who impressed our entire executive team with her technical abilities and vision for impactful applications. When I took the podium, I felt a strange calm. 6 months ago, I had been a high school student with a depleted college fund and uncertain prospects. Now, I stood before industry leaders as someone worthy of investment and recognition. Technology at its best is about solving real problems for real people, I began. My interest in computer science began with a simple question: how can I create systems that work more efficiently than the ones I see around me? That question has evolved into a passion for developing solutions that make information more accessible, processes more transparent, and opportunities more equitable. As I spoke about my projects and vision for the future, I caught a glimpse of my parents in the audience. Dad was listening with an intensity I rarely saw directed at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning respect. Mom was blinking rapidly, tissue clutched in her hand. Jason's face showed something I couldn't quite identify. Perhaps the first recognition that the sister he had casually dismissed had been building something significant while he had been coasting on family support. After the ceremony, during the reception, the CEO approached my parents. "You must be very proud," he said, extending his hand to my father. "Emma is exactly the kind of talent we're looking to nurture. Her analytical abilities are exceptional." Dad shook his hand firmly. "Yes, we're very proud." For the first time, I heard him say those words without immediately pivoting to Jason's accomplishments. The moment should have felt vindicating, but instead, it felt hollow. Too little, too late, and prompted by external validation rather than genuine understanding of who I was. Jason cornered me by the refreshment table, a plate of hors d'oeuvres in his hand. "This is pretty impressive, sis," he said, gesturing vaguely around the corporate space. "I had no idea you were into all this." "There's a lot you don't know about me," I replied neutrally. He had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "Yeah, I'm getting that. Listen, about the college fund situation, I really didn't know they were using your money. I thought they had separate accounts for us." "It doesn't matter now," I said. And I meant it. The anger that had once burned hot had cooled into something more productive, a determination to build a future so solid that it couldn't be compromised by anyone else's decisions. I found my own way. "You always do," he replied. And for once, it didn't sound like a dismissal, but like an observation tinged with something that might have been respect. As the event concluded, Sarah pulled me aside. "You have visitors from MIT tomorrow, admissions and department faculty who want to meet you before orientation. I've arranged for you to use the conference room for the meeting." I nodded gratefully. "Thank you for everything, Sarah. Not just the scholarship, but for seeing something in me worth investing in." She smiled. "That's the easy part, Emma. You make the worth obvious to anyone who's actually paying attention." My family lingered awkwardly at the edge of the departing crowd, clearly unsure about their role now that the formal event had concluded. I approached them with professional politeness, the same way I would thank any attendees. "Thanks for coming," I said, meaning it despite the complicated emotions churning beneath the surface. Mom moved as if to hug me, then stopped herself, respecting the boundaries I'd established since moving out. "It was a lovely ceremony, and your speech was so articulate." Dad cleared his throat. "We'd like to take you to dinner to celebrate if you're free." The invitation surprised me. In the month since I'd moved out, they had never suggested a family meal or any social interaction beyond Mom's occasional visits. I considered declining. There was preparation to do for tomorrow's MIT meeting, and the emotional energy required. For a family dinner felt daunting, but something in my father's expression stopped me. Not the confident car salesman who had always dominated our family dynamics, but an older man confronting the possibility that he had fundamentally misunderstood one of his children. "I could do dinner," I agreed. "There's an Italian place around the corner that doesn't require reservations." Jason smirked. "More Italian? I just spent 6 weeks eating pasta." "They have salads," I replied evenly. The restaurant was moderately busy for a weeknight, ambient conversation providing a buffer against awkward silences. We were seated in a corner booth, the four of us arranged in a configuration that felt both familiar and foreign. The Taylor family together again, yet fundamentally altered. Mom filled the initial silence with questions about MIT, when classes started, what my housing situation would be like, whether I had connected with any future classmates online. I answered each question factually, without elaboration. Dad studied the menu with unusual intensity. Jason checked his phone repeatedly, though he at least had the courtesy to keep it under the table. After we ordered, Dad set his water glass down with deliberate care. "Your mother and I have been talking," he began, echoing Mom's words from her earlier visit. "We want you to know that we're committed to supporting you through college. Not financially. You've made it clear you don't need that. But in other ways. Visits, care packages, whatever you might want." The offer hung in the air between us. 6 months ago, it would have meant everything. An acknowledgement of my value. A promise of the attention I had craved throughout my childhood. Now, it felt like closing a barn door after the horses had fled. "I appreciate that," I said carefully, "but I think we need to be realistic about where we are now. I've built a life that doesn't depend on family support. That's not going to suddenly change because of one scholarship ceremony." Mom's face fell. "We're trying, Emma." "I know you are," I acknowledged, "but trying now doesn't erase years of patterns. I'm not looking for dramatic apologies or sudden transformations. I just want honesty about what happened and why." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "We never meant to make you feel less important." But I was less important, I stated, keeping my voice level. My college fund was redirected to Jason's expenses. My achievements were acknowledged while yours were celebrated. My needs were considered after his wants were satisfied. Those aren't feelings, they're facts. Jason stared at his plate. I didn't ask for any of that. I'm not saying you did, I clarified. This isn't about blaming you for accepting what was offered. It's about acknowledging the reality of how resources and attention were distributed in our family. The server arrived with our meals, creating a momentary reprieve from the tension. As we began eating, Dad spoke again, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. When you were born, Jason was already 3. This active, demanding toddler who needed constant supervision. You were different from day one. Quieter, more observant, less likely to cry for attention. It became a pattern. He asked, you managed. He struggled, you succeeded. Somewhere along the way, we started allocating our resources based on who seemed to need them more urgently. That's a convenient narrative, I noted, but it doesn't explain everything. When I directly asked for support, like for the coding camp, I was denied while Jason received non-essentials. That wasn't about needs, it was about priorities. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. You're right. We prioritized Jason's happiness over your opportunities because his unhappiness was louder, more disruptive. Your disappointment was easier to bear because you handled it with such composure. I handled it with composure because I learned early that falling apart wouldn't change anything, I explained. That doesn't mean it hurt any less. The remainder of the dinner passed in a strange mixture of painful honesty and cautious reconnection. No magical transformation occurred. They didn't suddenly understand the full impact of their choices, and I didn't suddenly forgive years of systematic overlooking. But something shifted slightly, like tectonic plates making a minute adjustment that might, over time, alter the landscape between us. As we prepared to leave, Mom hesitated. Will you let us know when you arrive safely at MIT? Just a text or something? I nodded. I can do that. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was something. An acknowledgement that while our relationship had fundamentally changed, it wasn't entirely severed. I would build my future on my own terms, but I wouldn't deliberately cut them from it out of spite. The meeting with MIT representatives the next morning exceeded expectations. The department chair had reviewed my technical projects and was particularly interested in my approach to database optimization. We discussed potential research tracks, and he introduced me to current students who would be my peer mentors during the crucial first semester. As I showed them my library system and the food delivery aggregator, I felt a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with external validation. These were tangible products of my abilities, evidence not just of technical skills but of persistence and self-directed learning. The very qualities that had developed because of my family's circumstances were now opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed. Sarah joined us for lunch, seamlessly highlighting the ways my work at Tri-State had prepared me for academic challenges. The corporate scholarship and internship program she had established wasn't just financial support. It was a bridge between academic theory and practical application, creating opportunities for students like me to move between those worlds. After the MIT representatives departed, Sarah stayed behind, helping me gather my presentation materials. You know, she said conversationally, I recognized something in you the first time we met. Not just intelligence, that's common enough, but a particular kind of resilience. The kind that comes from learning early that you need to create your own opportunities. I looked up, surprised by her insight. How did you know? She smiled slightly. Because I lived it too. Youngest of 4, parents who meant well but never quite saw me clearly. I learned to build systems when the existing ones didn't work for me. She closed her laptop case with a decisive click. The difference is that I was in my 30s before I stopped trying to earn their approval. You figured it out much sooner. I haven't figured everything out, I admitted. Last night at dinner with my family, I realized I still want them to understand why their choices hurt me, even though I know they probably never fully will. Sarah nodded. That's natural, but understanding is different from approval. You're not seeking their permission for your success anymore. You're just wanting them to see clearly what they missed. Her distinction resonated deeply. I wasn't trying to prove my worth to them. That battle was already won through external validation and my own self-recognition. What remained was a simpler, more human desire, to be seen accurately by the people who should have seen me all along. As I packed the last of my belongings for MIT that weekend, I found the blue ribbon from 7th grade, the science fair award that Mom had framed and returned to me. I held it for a long moment, considering its journey. Once a symbol of achievement that went unrecognized, then hidden away, then rediscovered and acknowledged too late. And now, what? I placed it carefully in my suitcase, between layers of carefully folded clothes. Not because I needed it as validation anymore, but as a reminder of where I had started and how far I had come. The overlooked daughter had transformed into a recognized talent not by changing who she was, but by finding people who valued what she had been all along. The morning of my departure, I sent a brief text to my parents with my flight information and estimated arrival time in Cambridge. I didn't expect a response, but one came quickly from Mom. Safe travels. We are proud of you. 4 words that once would have meant everything. Now they were just words, their power diminished by years of actions that had spoken much louder. But they weren't nothing either. Perhaps they were the first halting steps in a new direction, not a restoration of what was lost, but the beginning of something different, built on clearer understanding and more honest foundations. As the plane lifted off, carrying me toward a future I had secured through my own efforts, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph or vindication, but a quiet certainty. I had not just survived being overlooked, I had transformed it into a source of strength. The very qualities that had developed in the shadow of my brother's spotlight, self-reliance, resourcefulness, perseverance, were now illuminating a path entirely my own. The college fund meant to secure my future had been diverted to extend my brother's present comfort. But in its absence, I had discovered something more valuable. The knowledge that my worth wasn't determined by my parents' investment, but by my own. And that was something no one could ever divert, diminish, or take away. MIT greeted me with Gothic architecture and autumn leaves scattered across pristine courtyards. My residence hall, a modernist structure of concrete and glass, housed primarily engineering and computer science students. My single room was smaller than my apartment in Springfield, but the large windows overlooking the Charles River made it feel expansive in ways that mattered. The first night, I stood at that window watching lights reflect on the water and felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. I was exactly where I needed to be, yet further from familiar ground than I'd ever been. Orientation week was a blur of campus tours, department meetings, and social mixers designed to help freshmen connect. I approached these events methodically, introducing myself to professors whose research aligned with my interests and fellow students who shared my passion for algorithm optimization. Some mistook my focused approach for coldness, but a few saw through to the determined woman beneath. By week's end, I had compiled a spreadsheet of potential study partners, research opportunities, and faculty mentors, resources more valuable than any family connection. Classes began with the intensity MIT was famous for. The workload was deliberately overwhelming, designed to teach time management as much as technical concepts. While other freshmen panicked at the volume of assignments, I leaned into systems I'd developed through years of self-directed learning. My habit of breaking large problems into manageable components served me well in courses on computational theory and advanced calculus. My remote position with Tri-State provided not just financial stability, but practical context for theoretical concepts. 3 mornings each week, I woke at 5 a.m. to join virtual meetings with the development team, contributing to real-world projects before heading to classes. This schedule left little time for the typical freshman experience of dormitory bonding and campus parties. But I didn't miss what I'd never expected to have. October brought midterms and the first real test of my preparation. I studied in the engineering library until closing, then continued in my room, surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations and flowcharts. When results were posted, I had achieved top marks in every course, not perfect scores, but solidly in the upper percentile. The validation wasn't as emotional as I'd expected. Instead, it felt like confirmation that my approach was working, that each carefully constructed step was taking me where I intended to go. A text from Mom arrived that evening. "How are your classes going? Dad and I think of you often." The message was typical of our new communication pattern. General inquiries without specific knowledge of my life. Expressions of caring without concrete actions to support them. I replied with brief, factual updates about my academic progress, offering no emotional content that might invite deeper conversation. Jason's messages were less frequent, but surprisingly more substantial. He had graduated after 5.5 years and taken a position with a marketing firm in Chicago. His texts described workplace challenges and occasional social updates. Once he asked, "Do you ever feel like you're faking it? Like someone will figure out you don't belong where you are?" The vulnerability surprised me. This from the brother who had navigated the world with the easy confidence of someone who always belonged wherever he landed. "Every day," I replied honestly. But then I solve another problem, complete another project, and remember that competence isn't a feeling. It's demonstrated through results. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji, and I wondered if my response had helped, or if I'd missed an opportunity for the kind of emotional connection we'd never established as children. November brought my first Thanksgiving away from home. Several classmates invited me to join their family celebrations, but I declined politely, preferring the quiet campus and empty labs. I spent the holiday weekend coding a neural network that could predict student study habits based on coursework patterns, a project outside my assigned curriculum that had captured my interest. The satisfaction of watching the algorithm learn and improve was more fulfilling than any turkey dinner surrounded by awkward conversation. Mom called Thanksgiving evening, the ambient sounds of a full house in the background. "We miss having you at the table," she said, her voice slightly too bright. "Jason brought his new girlfriend. I think it's getting serious." "That's nice," I replied, unsure what response she was looking for. "The project I'm working on is showing promising results. I might be able to publish a paper on it next semester." The conversation stalled after that, neither of us fluent in the language of distant family relationships. Before hanging up, she added, "Your room is still exactly as you left it, whenever you want to visit." I didn't correct her misperception. My childhood bedroom hadn't been my space in any meaningful sense. It had been a place I slept and studied, decorated according to Mom's tastes rather than my own. My dorm room, despite its institutional character, felt more authentically mine than that carefully preserved shrine to a daughter they had never truly seen. December brought final exams and Boston's first substantial snowfall. The campus transformed into a winter wonderland that momentarily softened the hard edges of academic pressure. I aced my finals through methodical preparation and maintained my position at the top of my class. The semester break stretched before me, 3 weeks without structured coursework or scheduled meetings. For the first time since arriving, I felt uncertain about how to proceed. Sarah's call provided welcome direction. "The executive team is planning next year's scholarship program," she explained. "They'd like you to participate in the selection, committee, review applications, maybe mentor the next recipient. Could you come back to Springfield for a week in January? The invitation offered the perfect blend of purpose and distance, a reason to return to my hometown without extended family obligations. I agreed immediately, booking a flight that would give me 5 days in Springfield before returning to Cambridge for an advanced winter session course on quantum computing. When I landed at Springfield Regional Airport, Sarah was waiting in arrivals. "No family pickup?" she asked as we walked to short-term parking. "They offered," I said, which was true. Mom had suggested they meet me, and I had countered with the equally accurate observation that the tri-state office was in the opposite direction from their house. "This is more efficient." Sarah nodded, not pursuing the subject further. Over the past months, she had become something between a mentor and a friend, close enough to understand the complexity of my family situation, professional enough to respect my boundaries around it. The week at Tri-State was productive. I reviewed scholarship applications, interviewed promising candidates, and helped refine the selection criteria based on my experience as both applicant and recipient. The company had expanded the program to include 5 full scholarships and 10 partial awards, creating significant opportunities for students throughout the region. On my 3rd day back, Sarah suggested lunch at a new bistro downtown. As we settled into a corner booth, she slid a folder across the table. "The executive team has been discussing your future with the company," she said. "This is a formal offer for post-graduation employment, full benefits, competitive salary, and a position in our advanced solutions division." I opened the folder to find a detailed contract outlining a software architect role with compensation substantially higher than the average entry-level position. "This is very generous," I said, scanning the terms. "But graduation is still more than 3 years away," Sarah smiled. "We're thinking long-term. Your contributions, even as a part-time remote employee, have been exceptional. We want to secure your talent before Silicon Valley or some trendy startup snatches you away." The offer represented everything. I had worked toward financial security, professional recognition, a clear path forward. Yet something in me hesitated. "Can I take some time to consider it?" "Of course," Sarah replied, seeming unsurprised by my response. "This isn't about rushing you. It's about showing you that we're serious about your future here." That evening, I found myself driving past my parents' house. I hadn't planned the detour. My rental car seemed to navigate there automatically, muscle memory from years of the same route. The house looked smaller somehow, the holiday decorations more modest than I remembered. A light snow was falling, softening the outlines of the familiar structure. I didn't stop or announce my presence. This wasn't a social call, but a personal reconnaissance mission. I needed to see this place that had shaped me from a distance, to confirm that it no longer held power over my choices or self-perception. As I was about to drive away, the front door opened. Dad stepped onto the porch, taking out the trash in his slippers despite the snow. He paused, squinting at my unfamiliar rental car idling at the curb. For a moment, we locked eyes through the windshield, mutual recognition flickering between us. He raised a tentative hand in greeting. After a moment's hesitation, I returned the gesture, a minimal acknowledgement that seemed fitting for our current relationship. Then I drove away, neither of us attempting further connection. Back at my hotel, I reviewed the tri-state offer. Again, weighing security against possibility. The position offered stability, a return to familiar territory, work I knew I could excel at. But 3 years at MIT had already expanded my horizons beyond what I could have imagined in high school. What might happen in the remaining time? What opportunities might I never discover if I committed to this predetermined path? I crafted a careful email to Sarah, expressing sincere appreciation for the offer while requesting time to explore all options before making such a significant commitment. Her reply came quickly. I expected nothing less. A mind like yours should consider every possibility. The offer remains open. The remainder of my visit passed without family contact. I worked at Tri-State during days and spent evenings exploring how my hometown had changed during my absence. New restaurants had opened downtown, and the old movie theater had been converted into a performing arts center. I felt like a tourist in my own history, observing familiar landmarks with the detached interest of someone passing through rather than returning home. On my final evening, as I packed for my early morning flight, my phone rang. The screen displayed Jason, an unusual occurrence since we typically communicated via text when we communicated at all. "Hey," I answered, wedging the phone between ear and shoulder as I organized my suitcase. "Are you really in Springfield?" he asked without preamble. I paused. "Yes. Working at Tri-State for the week. How did you know?" "Dad saw you outside the house a few days ago. He told Mom, who told our aunt, who mentioned it to my girlfriend's mother, who texted her, who told me." His tone was half amused, half accusatory. "Small town information network is still functioning perfectly." "I was just driving by," I explained, feeling strangely defensive. "I didn't want to intrude on your holiday break." "I'm not there," he said. "I'm in Chicago, just Mom and Dad. Rattling around in that house now." A pause. "They were hurt you didn't let them know you were in town." The comment ignited a flicker of irritation. Were they hurt when they took my college fund for your study abroad program? Or when they dismissed my achievements for years while celebrating your mediocrity? The silence that followed was heavy. When Jason spoke again, his voice was quieter. "That's fair. More than fair, actually." Another pause. "I've been thinking a lot about all that lately, about how differently things were for us growing up." "Riveting self-discovery," I replied, then immediately regretted the sarcasm. "Sorry, that was unnecessary." "No, I deserved it," he said, surprising me. "Look, I know we're not close. We never have been. But I'm starting to understand some things about our family that I was too self-absorbed to see before." He hesitated. "Would you be willing to meet for coffee before you leave, just to talk?" My instinct was to refuse, to maintain the careful distance I'd established from my family and the patterns that had shaped our interactions. But something in his voice suggested sincerity I wasn't accustomed to hearing from him. "My flight's at 7 a.m., I said. "Not much time for coffee." "Breakfast when you're back for spring break?" he suggested. "I'm not coming back for spring break. I'm doing an internship with a quantum computing lab in Boston." "Summer then," he persisted. "I'll be in Chicago, but I can drive down for a day." His determination was unexpected. The Jason I knew took the path of least resistance in all things. This effort to connect represented something new, something I wasn't sure how to respond to. "I'll let you know my summer schedule once it's finalized," I conceded, neither committing to nor rejecting the possibility. "I'll take it," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. The charm that had always come so easily to him while I labored to make even basic connections. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, considering this new development. Family relationships were evolving in ways I hadn't anticipated. The predictable patterns of my childhood, Jason the golden child, Emma the afterthought, were shifting into something more complex, less easily categorized. I wasn't sure whether to welcome this evolution or guard against it. The winter session at MIT immersed me in quantum computing theory, a field so cutting-edge that even the professors acknowledged the limits of current understanding. I thrived in this environment of academic humility, where questions were valued as highly as answers. My project on quantum algorithm optimization earned recognition from the department chair, who invited me to join his research team for the spring semester. As classes resumed, I settled into a new rhythm. Mornings in the quantum lab, afternoons in advanced coursework, evenings split between my remote work for Tri-State and independent projects. My circle of connections expanded beyond Casual study partners to include genuine friendships with fellow researchers who shared my intensity and focus. Lena, a doctoral candidate from Norway, became my closest confidant. Brilliant and bluntly honest, she approached both coding and human relationships with refreshing directness. Over late-night debugging sessions and early morning coffee, she drew out parts of my story I rarely shared. "Your family sounds fascinating," she observed after I recounted the Jason situation. "Like a case study in differential parenting outcomes." "They're not fascinating," I countered. "They're just people who made choices that reflected their values. Those values simply didn't include equal investment in their children." Lena tilted her head, considering. "Yet, you succeeded beyond what their investment would have predicted. That suggests either extraordinary resilience or the possibility that their neglect was actually beneficial to your development." The observation unsettled me. "Are you suggesting I should thank them for diverting my college fund and ignoring my achievements?" "Not at all," she replied. "I'm suggesting that your narrative might be more complex than 'they overlooked me and I succeeded despite them.' Perhaps you succeeded partially because their oversight forced you to develop capabilities you might not have otherwise." Her perspective challenged the tidy narrative I'd constructed, the overlooked daughter who proved her worth through independent achievement. It introduced the uncomfortable possibility that my parents' failures had not merely been obstacles to overcome, but contributing factors to the very strengths I now valued in myself. Spring brought cherry blossoms to campus and a surprise email from Dad. The message was brief and characteristically awkward. "Your mother and I are considering downsizing now that both you kids are established elsewhere. Before making decisions, wanted to ask if there are any items from your room you'd like us to set aside or send to you." The practical inquiry masked deeper questions. What items held meaning for me? What physical pieces of my childhood did I value enough to preserve? The answer was surprisingly few. My most significant possessions, my computer equipment, reference books, the small collection of awards and recognition letters, had moved with me first to the apartment and then to MIT. I replied with a short list: my collection of academic journals, a star chart that had hung above my desk, and the wooden chess set my grandmother had given me before she passed. Nothing sentimental, nothing that would suggest emotional attachment to the space they still referred to as your room. Dad's response came quickly. "We'll pack these carefully. Is there an address we should ship to, or would you prefer to collect them next time you're home?" The question of when I might consider myself home again hung unaddressed between us. I provided my campus address and thanked him for his consideration. The exchange was cordial, practical, and devoid of the emotional complexities that typically characterized our limited communications. Perhaps this was progress, a relationship based on respectful distance rather than unmet expectations. The carefully packed boxes arrived 2 weeks later. Between layers of bubble wrap and newspaper, I found not only the items I'd requested, but several I hadn't. The science fair ribbon in its frame, a set of advanced mathematics textbooks I'd used for self-study, and a small envelope containing childhood photos I'd never seen. Images of me focused intently on puzzles, building intricate structures with blocks, examining mechanical objects with serious concentration. The note enclosed was in Mom's handwriting. "Found these while sorting through old albums. Thought you might like to have them. You were always figuring things out, even before you could talk." The photos revealed a child I barely recognized. Not the invisible sister I remembered being, but a deeply absorbed, self-directed little person with interests and patterns that clearly presaged the woman I was becoming. Had my parents noticed these traits? The evidence suggested they had, at least enough to document them. Yet their awareness hadn't translated into the kind of support and recognition I had needed. I placed the photos in my desk drawer, unsure what to do with this new piece of historical evidence that complicated my understanding of my childhood. They showed neither the golden child of Jason's experience nor the overlooked daughter of my recollection, but something more nuanced, a child who commanded less attention perhaps because she was so self-sufficient in her interests. As the spring semester progressed, my work in the quantum computing lab led to a partnership with a leading technology firm developing practical applications for theoretical quantum algorithms. The collaboration included a generous stipend and potential patent rights for any innovations developed during the project. I signed the agreement without hesitation, another step toward a future secured through my own efforts rather than family support. Sarah checked in periodically, our virtual meetings focusing primarily on my technical work for Tri-State rather than the standing job offer. "MIT seems to be agreeing with you," she observed during one video call. "Your solutions show a depth of theoretical understanding we don't typically see in undergraduate contributors." "The quantum lab is pushing my thinking in new directions," I acknowledged. "I'm seeing connections between classical optimization problems and quantum approaches that might have applications for Tri-State's financial modeling systems." "Exactly. Why we want you on our team long-term," she replied. "But no pressure. Explore all the paths that interest you. We'll be here." Her consistent support without expectation of reciprocal loyalty continued to serve as a counterpoint to my family experience. Sarah invested in my development because she valued what I could contribute, not because of obligation or comparison, to others. The clarity of this transaction, recognition based on demonstrated merit rather than familial duty, remained refreshingly uncomplicated. As summer approached, the quantum computing project extended into an official internship, position that would keep me in Cambridge through August. I updated my carefully maintained 5-year plan, adjusting timelines and goals to accommodate this new opportunity. My path was taking shape exactly as I had envisioned, each accomplishment opening doors to more advanced challenges and recognition. Then came the call that disrupted my carefully structured progress. Mom's voice was tight with controlled emotion. "Your father had a heart attack this morning. He's stable now, but they're keeping him in the hospital for observation and tests." The news landed like a physical blow, momentarily disorienting in its intensity. Despite our complicated relationship, despite the years of feeling overlooked and undervalued, the thought of Dad's mortality shook something fundamental in my understanding of the world. "How serious was it?" I asked, my voice sounding distant, in my own ears. "Serious enough," Mom replied. "They're talking about bypass surgery next week depending on the test results." She paused. "Jason is driving down tomorrow. I know you're busy with your internship, but I thought you should know." The unspoken question hung between us. Would I come home for this family emergency, or had the distance I'd established become unbridgeable even in crisis? I stared at my calendar, at the carefully scheduled research sessions and development meetings that filled the coming weeks. Important work, meaningful contributions, professional obligations. None of it seemed to carry the weight it had moments before. "I'll be on a flight tomorrow," I heard myself say. "Text me the hospital details and his room number." After hanging up, I sat motionless at my desk, surprised by my own decision. The rational choice would have been to stay, to maintain professional commitments and the emotional distance I had worked so hard to establish. Yet something deeper than rationality had answered for me. Some primal connection that years of neglect and resentment hadn't severed completely. I submitted a brief leave of absence request to the lab director, citing a family medical emergency. His response was immediate and understanding. "Family comes first. We'll adjust the schedule. Take the time you need." The flight to Springfield felt like a journey backward in time, each mile undoing careful layers of separation I had built since leaving. I had constructed a life defined by forward momentum, by consistent progress away from the patterns of my childhood. Now I was voluntarily returning to the epicenter of those patterns, uncertain what version of myself would emerge from the encounter. Springfield Memorial Hospital was a maze of identical corridors and antiseptic smells. Following Mom's texted directions, I found Dad's room on the cardiac floor. Through the half-open door, I could see him propped against pillows, looking smaller and grayer than I remembered. Monitors beeped steadily beside him, IV lines snaking from his arm to bags of clear liquid hanging above the bed. Mom sat beside him, her back to the door, one hand resting lightly on his. They were talking quietly, heads inclined toward each, other in the familiar posture of their decades-long partnership. For a moment, I stood unnoticed, observing this private tableau of my parents facing mortality together. Then Mom glanced up and saw me. "Emma," she said, surprise evident in her voice despite having known I was coming. "You're here." Dad turned slowly, his movements careful as if each required deliberate planning. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of me, and something flickered across his face. Relief or disbelief, I couldn't tell which. "You didn't need to come," he said, his voice raspy but stronger than his appearance had led me to expect. "I'm going to be fine." I stepped into the room, suddenly uncertain of the appropriate protocol. Should I hug him, take his hand, maintain a respectful distance? In the absence of clear guidelines, I opted for practical inquiry. "What have the doctors said about the bypass surgery?" I asked, placing my overnight bag on an empty chair. "Scheduled." "For Monday," Mom answered when Dad didn't immediately respond. "3 vessels need repair. They're optimistic about the outcome, but the recovery will take time." I nodded, absorbing this information with the same methodical approach I applied to complex algorithms. Break down the problem, identify the components, determine the next logical steps. "Have you lined up help for after he comes home? Considered modifications to the house for recovery? Researched cardiac rehabilitation programs in the area?" Mom blinked, seemingly startled by my practical focus. "We haven't gotten that far yet," she admitted. "It's all been so sudden." "I can help with that," I offered, already mentally compiling resources and research questions. "I'll start looking into options this evening." Dad watched this exchange with an odd expression. "You haven't changed," he said finally, still approaching problems like puzzles to be solved. The observation caught me off guard. It was the most perceptive thing he had said about my personality in years, perhaps ever. Not a comparison to Jason, not a dismissal of my methods, but a simple recognition of how my mind worked. "It's an effective approach," I replied, unsure how to respond to this unexpected insight. "It is," he agreed. "I should have appreciated it more when you were younger." The comment hung in the air between us. Not quite an apology, not exactly a reconciliation, but an acknowledgement that contained elements of both. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't, turning instead to practical questions about his medical care and prognosis. As evening approached, Mom suggested we get dinner in the hospital cafeteria while Dad rested. Walking beside her through the sterile corridors, I felt the ghost of childhood patterns, following her lead, adjusting to her pace. Yet something had shifted in our dynamic. She seemed less the authority figure of my youth and more a worried woman facing her husband's mortality with whatever resources she could muster. Over surprisingly decent soup and sandwiches, she filled me in on the details of Dad's condition. "It happened while he was cleaning the gutters," she explained. "He came inside saying his chest felt tight, then just collapsed in the kitchen. If I hadn't been home." She left the sentence unfinished, the alternative too painful to articulate. "Has he been having symptoms before this?" I asked. Looking back, yes. Shortness of breath when climbing stairs. Fatigue he blamed on age. She stirred her soup without eating. "He's not good at admitting weakness." "A family trait," I observed, the comment escaping before I could censor it. To my surprise, she smiled faintly. Yes, I suppose it is. You and your father are more alike than either of you would admit. The comparison startled me. In my childhood narrative, Jason had been the one who inherited Dad's significant traits: his charm, his ease with people, his assumption that the world would accommodate his needs. I had never considered what qualities of his might have shaped my own personality. We're both stubborn, I conceded, and systematic. And fiercely independent, Mom added, and reluctant to ask for help even when you need it. She looked up from her soup. He was so proud when that newspaper article came out about your scholarship. Carried a copy in his wallet for months. Showed it to anyone who would look. This revelation collided with my established understanding of our relationship. He never told me that. No, she agreed. He wouldn't. Just like you never told us about the scholarship competition until after you'd won it. You both play your cards close until you're certain of the outcome. I considered her words, turning them over like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit the picture I had constructed. I didn't tell you because I didn't think you'd be interested. You were focused on Jason's study abroad program. She flinched slightly at the directness. We made mistakes, Emma. Serious ones that hurt you. I won't pretend otherwise. She set down her spoon. But there were moments when we saw you clearly, even if we didn't show it properly. Those photos I sent, I took them because I was fascinated by how your mind worked, even when you were tiny. The way you'd line up your blocks by size, or take apart your toys to see how they functioned. Then why? I began, but she interrupted gently. Why didn't we support that better? Why didn't we celebrate your abilities the way we did Jason's? She shook her head. I ask myself that too. I think we misunderstood what you needed. Jason's needs were loud and obvious. Yours were quieter, more self-contained. We mistook your self-sufficiency for not needing us, when really, you just needed us differently. The explanation wasn't entirely satisfying, but it held a kernel of truth I hadn't considered. My independence hadn't emerged solely as a response to neglect. It had been an intrinsic quality they had recognized, even if they had misinterpreted its implications. As we returned to Dad's room, Jason was arriving, his familiar figure filling the doorway as he greeted the night nurse. He turned at our approach, surprise registering at the sight of me beside Mom. You made it, he said, genuine warmth in his voice. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I admitted. He hugged Mom, then hesitated before extending the same gesture to me. After a moment's consideration, I accepted the embrace. Brief, but not entirely uncomfortable. Another small shift in our evolving family constellation. In Dad's room, the three of us arranged ourselves around his bed like planets finding a new orbital pattern after a gravitational disruption. The conversation flowed more easily than I had expected, focusing primarily on Dad's condition and recovery plans, rather than the complicated emotional terrain beneath our interactions. As visiting hours ended, we stood to leave. Dad reached for my hand, his grasp weaker than I remembered but insistent. Thank you for coming, he said, his eyes holding mine with unusual directness. It means more than I can say. I nodded, unable to formulate a response that balanced honesty with the compassion this moment seemed to require. Instead, I squeezed his hand gently before releasing it, a gesture that acknowledged our connection without promising more than I could deliver. Outside the hospital, Mom offered me my old room for the night. Everything's ready, she assured me. Fresh sheets, towels in the bathroom. I had planned to stay at a hotel, to maintain the emotional boundaries I had carefully constructed. But standing in the darkened parking lot, watching my mother's brave attempt at normalcy in the face of her husband's health crisis, I found myself reconsidering. Thank you, I said. That would be fine for tonight. The three of us drove home in separate cars, a fitting metaphor for our current relationship, connected by circumstance and history, yet following independent paths even when moving in the same direction. The week that followed Dad's surgery transformed time into an elastic entity, stretching during the long hours in hospital waiting rooms, compressing during the brief periods when I could escape to respond to urgent emails. From MIT and Tri-State, I created a spreadsheet tracking Dad's medications, test results, and physician comments, organizing the chaos of medical information into manageable data points. When the cardiac surgeon expressed surprise at my detailed questions about bypass, procedures, and recovery protocols, I explained that research was my default response to uncertainty. He smiled and said, "Your father is lucky to have such a thorough advocate." The word advocate lingered in my mind. I had returned to Springfield out of some complex mixture of obligation and concern, not expecting to step into an active role in Dad's care. Yet my organizational skills and analytical approach had proven unexpectedly valuable in navigating the medical bureaucracy. Mom seemed relieved to defer to my carefully researched questions, and even Jason looked to me for clarification. When doctors use technical terminology, by the third day post-surgery, a routine had established itself. I arrived at the hospital by 7 a.m. with my laptop, setting up a makeshift office in the corner of Dad's room. Morning rounds brought doctors with updates and adjustments to treatment plans, which I documented meticulously. Mom arrived mid-morning with home-cooked food that hospital staff pretended not to notice. Jason appeared in the afternoons after his remote work meetings, bringing magazines and news from outside that momentarily distracted Dad from his discomfort. "You've got this all under control," Jason observed one afternoon, watching me update the medication schedule I'd created. I wouldn't even know what questions to ask. "It's just systems thinking," I replied, downplaying the hours of research behind my apparent expertise. Breaking a complex situation into manageable components. "Still," he persisted, "I'm glad you're here. I'd be useless at all this." The admission surprised me. The Jason of my childhood had never acknowledged limitations or expressed gratitude for my abilities. This new version, humbler, more self-aware, required adjustments to my understanding of our relationship. On the 5th day, Dad was deemed stable enough for discharge. The hospital provided basic care instructions, but I had already compiled a comprehensive recovery plan, nutrition guidelines, physical therapy exercises, medication schedules, and follow-up appointment reminders. As the discharge nurse reviewed my documents, she raised her eyebrows. "You work in healthcare?" she asked. "Computer science," I corrected. "But principles of systems optimization apply across domains." Dad watched this exchange from his wheelchair, an unfamiliar expression on his face, something between pride and puzzlement. When the nurse left to finalize paperwork, he spoke quietly. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, gesturing at the binder of materials I'd prepared. "The hospital provides basic instructions." "Basic isn't optimal," I replied. "And optimization is what I do." His eyes held mine for a long moment. "You've always seen ways to improve things, even as a little kid." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. I should have valued that more. The comment hung between us. Not quite an apology, not exactly a compliment, but something that contained elements of both. I nodded, acknowledging his words without expanding the emotional territory they opened. The homecoming required further adjustments to family dynamics. Dad was confined primarily to the first floor, sleeping in the guest room rather than climbing stairs to the master bedroom. Mom transformed the living room into a recovery space, with medical supplies organized on the coffee table and a recliner positioned for optimal television viewing. I had extended my leave from MIT to 10 days, enough time to establish the care, routines, and ensure the transition home proceeded smoothly. Jason returned to Chicago with promises to visit on weekends, leaving the day-to-day management to Mom and me. The first evening alone with my parents felt strangely intimate after years of emotional distance. We ate dinner in the living room rather than the formal dining room, balancing plates on our laps as an old movie played softly in the background. The conversation remained focused on practical matters: medication timing, dietary restrictions, follow-up appointments. Safer territory than the emotional undercurrents that flowed beneath our careful interactions. As I cleared the dishes, Dad called me back to the living room. "Sit for a minute," he said, patting the sofa beside his recliner. "I want to talk to you." Mom glanced between us. "I'll finish the kitchen," she offered, collecting the remaining plates and retreating tactfully. I sat tentatively, maintaining a careful distance. "Is something wrong? Are you experiencing new symptoms?" "No, nothing like that." He adjusted his position slightly, wincing at the movement. "I've been thinking a lot since the heart attack. About time, priorities, things left unsaid." I tensed, preparing for an emotional conversation I wasn't sure I wanted to have. In the carefully reconstructed life I'd built, there was limited space for revisiting old wounds or complicated family histories. "When you moved out that day," he began, taking just those few boxes, "I was angry. Thought you were being melodramatic, trying to punish us for choices we'd made about money that was technically ours to allocate." The characterization stung, but I remained silent, letting him continue. "It took me a long time to understand that it wasn't about the money. Not really." He looked down at his hands, veined and papery against the arm of the recliner. "It was about what the money represented. That we'd chosen Jason's wants over your needs. That we'd always done that, in ways I didn't fully see until you were gone." His frankness surprised me. The father of my childhood had never been given to emotional candor or personal reflection. "The scholarship ceremony was a wake-up call," he continued. "Seeing all those people, professionals, executives, treating you with such respect, talking about your potential, your contributions. I realized we'd missed something fundamental about who you were." "It wasn't just about the scholarship," I said quietly. "It was years of different treatment, different expectations, different levels of attention and support." He nodded slowly. "I know that now. But understanding comes too late sometimes." He shifted again, adjusting to find a more comfortable position. "Having your help this week, seeing how you approach problems, organize information, anticipate needs. These aren't just skills you developed. They're who you are fundamentally. And instead of recognizing and nurturing that, we treated those qualities as convenient, useful, when we needed them, but not worth celebrating like Jason's more visible achievements." The acknowledgement was more direct, more insightful than anything he had offered previously. Not a generic apology for unspecified wrongs, but a specific recognition of how they had failed to see and value my essential nature. "I can't change the past," he continued. "Can't restore that college fund or redo those years. But I can tell you now that I see you clearly. And I'm sorry it took a crisis for me to say what should have been obvious all along. You are exceptional, Emma. Not in comparison to Jason or anyone else. Just fundamentally, intrinsically exceptional in ways that are uniquely yours." I sat perfectly still, absorbing his words. The recognition I had once craved so desperately now arrived when I had learned to live without it. Yet it affected me. More than I had expected. Validation not of my accomplishments, but of my core self, the person beneath the achievements and capabilities. "Thank you for saying that," I replied finally. "It means something to hear it, even now." He reached across the space between us, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, I took it, feeling the cool, papery texture of his skin against mine. We sat like that for several minutes, connected by this simple physical contact that conveyed what further words might have complicated. When Mom, Returned from the kitchen, she found us watching the movie in companionable silence, our hands still loosely linked. Something in her expression suggested she understood the significance of this tableau, but she made no comment, simply resuming her seat and turning her attention to the screen. That night in my childhood bedroom, I made revisions to the 5-year plan that had guided my decisions since high school. The structured pathway I had created focused primarily on academic and professional milestones, degrees, publications, positions, financial benchmarks. Nowhere in this careful mapping had I accounted for the human connections that existed beyond the realm of achievement. I added a new category: relationships, with subcategories for family, colleagues, and friends. Under family, I wrote a single tentative goal: establish communication patterns based on current reality rather than past dynamics. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, nor was it a return to childhood longings for recognition. It was an acknowledgement that family relationships existed in the present as well as the past, capable of evolution if approached with appropriate boundaries and realistic expectations. The remaining days of my extended leave passed in a blur of practical caregiving and cautious conversation. Dad regained strength incrementally, progressing from short walks around the living room to brief ventures onto the front porch. I revised his care protocols based on observed patterns, creating simplified versions that Mom could manage independently after my departure. The night before my return to MIT, Mom insisted on cooking my favorite childhood meal: vegetable lasagna with extra mushrooms and a side of garlic bread. The gesture was significant. I couldn't recall the last time my preferences had taken precedence in family meal planning. Over dinner, Dad raised a topic that surprised me. "We've been discussing the house," he said, glancing at Mom for confirmation. "It's too big for just us now, especially with these stairs. We're thinking of selling, maybe looking at one of those single-level homes in the new development near the hospital." The news was unexpected. My parents had lived in this house for over 30 years. It was difficult to imagine them elsewhere. "That makes practical sense," I acknowledged, especially during recovery. "We wanted to know if there's anything here you'd want before we start that process," Mom added. "Furniture, mementos, anything with sentimental value." I considered the question seriously. What in this house truly mattered to me? The physical space had shaped my childhood, but held few objects that I felt connected to beyond the items I'd already taken. "I'll think about it and let you know," I promised, "but don't hold up your plans on my account." "And Jason's college things," Dad continued, a slight hesitation in his voice. "The sports trophies, team photos, we're not sure what to do with those." The comment revealed volumes about how our family dynamic had shifted. Before my departure, for MIT, Jason's memorabilia had occupied places of honor throughout the house, unquestioned in their importance. Now they were being evaluated as potential excess in a downsizing plan. "Ask Jason what he wants to keep," I suggested. "The rest can be photographed and stored digitally if you want to preserve the memories without the physical objects." Dad nodded, seeming relieved by this practical solution. "That's a good idea. Practical as always." The comment held none of the dismissiveness that once might have accompanied such an observation. Instead, it carried a tone of genuine appreciation, recognition of a valuable perspective rather than characterization of a limiting trait. After dinner, as I packed my belongings for the early morning flight, Mom appeared in the doorway of my room. "I have something for you," she said, holding a small wooden box I didn't recognize. "It was your grandmother's. I found it when sorting through the attic last month." She placed the box in my hands, a simple, hand-carved container with a sliding lid. Inside was a delicate silver chain supporting a small pendant in the shape of a compass rose. "She wanted you to have it when you turned 18, Mom explained. "But things were difficult between us then. It didn't seem like the right time." She touched the pendant gently. The card with it said it was because you'd always find your way no matter what. The unexpected inheritance created a lump in my throat. My mother's mother had died when I was 12, but I remembered her as the family member who seemed to understand my intensity, my focus, my different way of experiencing the world. "Thank you for keeping it for me," I said, carefully removing the necklace from its box. The silver was tarnished from years of storage, but the design remained elegant and precise. "Let me help you put it on," Mom offered, taking the chain and moving behind me to fasten it at my nape. Her fingers brushed my neck lightly, the gesture more intimate than our usual careful interactions. When she stepped back, her eyes were damp. "It suits you," she said simply. That night, I slept more soundly than I had since returning to Springfield. The compass rose resting against my collarbone like a talisman connecting past to present. In the morning, the goodbye was neither dramatic nor dismissive. Dad hugged, me carefully mindful of his healing chest. Mom provided a container of homemade granola for the journey. We made plans for a video call the following weekend to discuss his recovery progress. These simple arrangements, unremarkable in most families, represented significant shifts in ours. Acknowledgement that connection could continue beyond physical presence, that relationships required maintenance rather than assumption. The return to MIT felt less like escape than transition, movement between different aspects of a life that was increasingly integrated rather than compartmentalized. I resumed my research in the quantum computing lab, bringing fresh perspectives that surprised even me. The break from academic intensity had created space for new connections, conceptual leaps that might not have emerged without interruption. Lena noticed the difference immediately. "You seem changed," she observed during our first coffee meetup after my return. "Less rigid somehow." "A family medical crisis will do that," I replied, attempting to deflect her typical directness. She shook her head. "No, it's more specific than general stress effects. You're moving differently in the world, like you've shifted weight from one foot to another." Her observation was typically perceptive. Something had shifted during those days in Springfield, not a dramatic reconciliation or erasure of past patterns, but a subtle recalibration of how I understood my family and my place within it. The necklace became a daily companion, its weight against my skin a reminder of continuity beyond the ruptures and reconstructions of family relationships. I found myself touching it during challenging research problems or difficult coding sessions, drawing some indefinable strength from its presence. 2 weeks after my return, Sarah arranged a video meeting to discuss my continued work with Tri-State. "The executive team remains impressed with your contributions," she began, referencing the algorithm optimizations I'd completed remotely even during Dad's hospitalization. "The standing offer for post-graduation employment remains open, with adjusted terms to reflect your growing expertise." "I'm grateful for the company's flexibility," I replied. "The recent family situation has given me perspective on geographic considerations that I hadn't fully factored into my planning." Sarah's expression sharpened with interest. "Meaning?" "Meaning I'm reconsidering the advantages of returning to the Midwest region after graduation," I explained. "Being closer to family might be more important than I previously calculated." The admission surprised me as much as Sarah. 6 months earlier, proximity to my family would have been a negative factor in any employment decision. Now it registered as a potential positive, not because our relationship had transformed completely, but because I was beginning to see value in maintaining connections that acknowledged both historical complexity and present reality. Tri-State would certainly welcome that decision, Sarah said carefully. "But take your time. The right choice isn't just about professional opportunities." Her wisdom continued to serve as a guidepost in my evolving understanding of success. The metrics I had once used to measure progress, academic recognition, professional advancement, financial independence, now expanded to include less quantifiable elements, genuine connections, meaningful engagements, balanced perspective. The semester proceeded with achievements that once would have defined my sense of worth. My quantum computing research was accepted for publication in a prestigious journal. The MIT Innovation Competition awarded my team first place for an algorithm that optimized energy usage in complex systems. Tri-State implemented my database restructuring across their entire operational framework, resulting in significant efficiency improvements. Each accomplishment brought satisfaction, but no longer carried the weight of validation I had once assigned to external recognition. My worth existed independently of these markers, grounded in a more fundamental understanding of who I was and what I valued. Jason maintained contact through regular texts and occasional video calls, our conversations evolving from surface updates to more substantive exchanges. During one such call, he confessed his growing dissatisfaction with his marketing career. "It's all smoke and mirrors," he explained, running a hand through hair that had begun to thin despite his youth. "Nothing tangible, nothing that makes a real difference." "What would you rather be doing?" I asked, genuinely curious about his self-perception. He hesitated. "I've been taking night classes in education, thinking about teaching high school, social studies, and coaching basketball." He laughed self-consciously. Dad would have had a fit about the salary cut a year ago, but now he just says life's too short to hate your job. The revelation suggested changes extending beyond my own. Evolving relationship with our parents. Dad's health crisis appeared to have catalyzed reconsiderations throughout our family system, creating space for authenticity that hadn't existed previously. "You'd be a good teacher?" I said, surprising myself with the assessment. "You've always connected easily with people, made complex things accessible." His smile was grateful and a little surprised, as if unused to sincere compliments from me. "Thanks, Em. That actually means a lot coming from you." The exchange marked another small shift in our sibling dynamic, movement from the comparative framework of our childhood toward mutual recognition of distinct strengths and choices. When spring break arrived, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. I booked a flight to Springfield for a 3-day visit, not out of obligation or crisis management, but from genuine desire to continue the delicate reconstruction of family relationships that had begun during Dad's recovery. Mom met me at the airport, her face lighting with genuine pleasure at my appearance. "You look well," she said, embracing me briefly but warmly. "The necklace suits you." "I wear it every day," I admitted, touching the compass rose that had become a familiar presence. "It feels like it belongs." The drive home, and I was beginning to use that word without mental quotation marks, revealed changes beyond my family relationships. Springfield itself seemed different, or perhaps my perception of it had evolved. The familiar landmarks no longer represented confinement but continuity, physical manifestations of a history that, while complicated, remained part of who I was. At the house, Dad greeted me from the front porch, standing without assistance, a significant improvement from the frail figure in the hospital bed. "Perfect timing," he called as we approached. "The realtor just left. She thinks we could list by next month." Inside, the changes were immediately apparent. Boxes lined the hallway, and spaces once crowded with furniture and memorabilia appeared, streamlined and purposeful. The wall of Jason's sports achievements had been dismantled, replaced by a single framed photo of him coaching a youth basketball team, present purpose rather than past glory. "We've been sorting through everything," Mom explained, navigating around the boxes. "It's amazing how much you accumulate without noticing." "Jason took some of his things last weekend," Dad added. "Said he only wanted what actually mattered to him now, not what he thought should matter back then." The distinction resonated with my own evolving perspective. What truly mattered now was not the validation I had once craved from my family, but the possibility of relationships based on who we actually were, rather than the roles we had occupied in our shared history. Over dinner at a new restaurant downtown, Dad's first substantial outing since his surgery, we discussed the changes underway in all our lives. Mom had joined a community garden project, finding unexpected satisfaction in growing vegetables and organizing the watering schedule. Dad was considering part-time consulting work that would utilize his sales experience without the stress of full-time employment. And I shared tentative thoughts about accepting Tri-State's job offer after graduation, which would place me within driving distance of their new home. "You'd come back to Springfield?" Mom asked, surprise evident in her voice. "I thought you were heading for Silicon Valley or Boston." "Those are still possibilities," I acknowledged. "But there are advantages to the Midwest that I'm reconsidering. Cost of living, proximity to family, the opportunity to make meaningful impact in a community that needs technical talent." Dad studied me over his water glass. "A year ago, proximity to family wouldn't have made your pro-con list except as a negative." "A year ago, a lot of things were different," I replied simply. The acknowledgement hung between us, recognition of how a crisis had catalyzed changes that might otherwise have taken decades or never occurred at all. Not a fairy tale reconciliation or erasure of past patterns, but a recalibration based on new understanding and evolving priorities. On my final evening in Springfield, we visited the model home in the development my parents were considering. The single-level design featured wide doorways, accessible bathrooms, and a layout conducive to aging in place. As they discussed finishes and upgrade options with the sales representative, I found myself calculating distances, from this location to the Tri-State office, to the airport, to potential apartment complexes that might suit my needs after graduation. These practical considerations reflected a shift in my decision-making framework, where once I had structured my life to maximize distance from childhood patterns, I now recognized the possibility of proximity without repetition, of new relationships built on the foundation of shared history, but not confined by its limitations. The final morning brought a quiet breakfast on the back patio, spring sunshine warming the air despite the early hour. Dad handed me a small package as I prepared to leave for the airport. "Something to add to your collection," he said simply. Inside was a leather-bound journal similar to the one he had given me for my 16th birthday. The gift I had once resented as impersonal and insufficient compared to Jason's driving lessons and car fund. But this version had been customized, my name embossed on the cover and a brief inscription on the first page. "For Emma, whose ability to create systems, solve problems, and find clarity has always been her unique gift. With love and respect, Dad." The inscription acknowledged both my essential nature and his growing understanding of it, recognition that arrived late but carried genuine appreciation rather than compensatory guilt. "Thank you," I said, running my fingers over the embossed lettering. "I'll use this for my updated 5-year plan." He smiled at the reference to my methodical approach. "Some things don't change," he observed, "and shouldn't. Your systematic mind is what makes you exceptional." The compliment landed differently than previous acknowledgments. Not a validation required for my sense of worth, but an appreciation that complemented my own self-understanding. The distinction mattered enormously. As Mom drove me to the airport, we discussed practical arrangements for their upcoming move and my potential return to the region after graduation. The conversation flowed easily, unencumbered by the weight of past expectations or unmet needs. At the departure terminal, she hugged me with surprising strength. "This visit meant a lot," she said. "Having you here by choice rather than crisis." "It meant a lot to me too," I replied, and found that I meant it genuinely. Boarding the plane, back to Cambridge, I realized that the most significant change of the past year wasn't external, but internal. Not the shift in family dynamics or career possibilities, but my own evolving relationship with the past. The diverted college fund that had once symbolized all the ways I had been overlooked now registered as just one element in a complex family history, its importance diminished by the life I had constructed in its absence. My parents had given my college money to fund my brother's extended education and European adventures. In response, I had severed financial dependence and built a future secured through my own efforts. But the true outcome of that painfully clarifying moment wasn't just professional success or financial independence. It was the recognition that my worth existed independently of external validation, that the strengths forged through being overlooked had created a resilience no one could divert or diminish. The compass rose rested against my skin as the plane lifted off, pointing toward possibilities that incorporated both where I had come from and where I was going. No longer opposing forces, but complementary aspects of an integrated identity. The overlooked daughter had become a woman who saw herself clearly, whose validation came from within, and who could choose connection from a position of strength rather than need. As Springfield receded beneath clouds, I opened the journal to its first blank page. At the top, I wrote a new title for the 5-year plan that had guided my decisions since high school. Moving forward, building a future that honors both past and possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.